Hello, this is Craig Callender. I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of California, San Diego. I do philosophy of science and philosophy of physics and sometimes metaphysics of science. And I'm speaking to.
Hi, this is Jonathan Schaffer. I'm a professor of philosophy at the Australian National University. I focus on metaphysics. I occasionally do some epistemology and a little bit of philosophy of science.
And today we're hoping to talk about metaphysics and its relationship to science. So we're going to talk about metaphysics to some extent in philosophy of science. Recently, there's been a lot of criticism or I don't know, antagonism between philosophy of science and metaphysics. There have been some books written arguing about, and chapters written in books arguing about that metaphysics has become untethered from the empirical world and various complaints like that. And so we're going to try to sort out all of this, introduce you guys, listeners to this issue, and try to sort through all of these issues.
So I think it's a great issue to sort through, and I think there's, while I'm sort of the pro-metaphysics guy, and I'm very much in favor of doing metaphysics, I think there are some interesting and important concerns to address. I thought I might put some of the issues in a little bit of historical context by talking about what I see as sort of a kind of a strongly empiricist view that we find both in the British empiricists of the 18th century and in the logical positivists of the early 20th century that have led people to think that metaphysical questions are, meaningless or empty or at least not worth pursuing. But then what's happened sort of since maybe the sort of 1950s or 1960s has been a real revival of interest in traditional metaphysical questions, which has led now in the sort of last decade or so to a sort of some real sort of hand-wringing, what are we doing, returning to these traditional metaphysical questions. And this has led to, within metaphysics, it's led to debates about the subject itself that gets called sort of meta-metaphysics, but also to a lot of philosophers of science, Craig, as you were alluding to, sort of thinking that the metaphysicians have gone too far.
That's right. And yes, so if at a very coarse-grained level you're on the pro-metaphysics side, then
Right.
at a very coarse-grained level I'm on the not exactly anti-metaphysics. It doesn't sound quite right because I do think that a lot of metaphysics is very important and substantive. In fact, in another context, I can imagine myself arguing for metaphysics' importance, when I'm talking to physicists or that. But in this context, I mean, I guess I do have some sympathy with the idea that a lot of metaphysics has, in some sense, gone too far, and that some of it is not substantive. And so I think I'm going to, at this coarse-grained level, take that side. So, for instance, many metaphysicians today will argue about, whether, to take some examples, whether, you take a letter and you write, and an author writes writes on the one side of the letter, and then somebody else writes something on the other side of the letter. Now, is that two letters or one? Well, to me, that doesn't seem like a substantive issue. It seems to be, entirely a matter of convenience. You could, call it one letter or two letters, depending on how you individuate letters. Just a question of line up your definitions, and then the mystery is resolved. And I guess I think there's a bunch of other questions like that too. Whether when I, fold my fingers together into a fist, now if I brought a new object into the world, see, some people think that that's a big issue, and not just I would grant if it's just a question of regimentation of concepts, then that could be an issue. But I have a hard time seeing how it's a substantive metaphysical debate.
Yeah. So I think it might be worth us distinguishing a variety of ways in which a metaphysical debate might or might not be substantive. So one possibility is that the two sides are really just saying the same thing in different words, so that the theories presented are in some sense just notational equivalents, or there's some way of sort of properly translating from one to the other that just totally preserves the meanings of what both sides are saying. But there's another view that one might have, which is to say that, well, there really is a difference in view. Take the case that you were just talking about when you fold your fingers into a fist, whether a new thing comes into existence. You might think, hey, the one side thinks that, this many things exist in the world, and the other side thinks that there's an extra thing in the world, and that seems like a different view of what there is in the world. But you might think that, though there's a real difference in the view, there's no sort of there's no way to tell which is the right view. So you could kind of have a kind of a skeptical realist perspective on that kind of debate as well.
That's right. And the reason I mention these sorts of issues, and I mean, so the listener might wonder, what does this all have to do with science or lack of science? Is that these seem to be issues that are very far from anything that any science is ever going to consider. And in general, some philosophers feel that metaphysics has moved further and further away from science. And I guess I would like to just step back for 1 second too. I mean, again, to put it in context and to say, it didn't always used to be this way. So most of the greats of in the history of philosophy were well acquainted with, and even active participants in the science of their day. Hume was, Kant was, of course, Berkeley. Just basically more or less. It's Leibniz, of course.
Of course.
So Leibniz invented steam engines. When a steam engine. When I opened up a book on the distribution of galaxies recently, which applies statistical mechanics to gravitating systems, the whole first chapter, more or less, is devoted to Kant.
Wow.
Which is kind of surprising, or especially surprising to somebody who would, be familiar with Kant from a modern philosophy course. And so it didn't used to be this way.
Though specialization has really, I've heard Leibniz described as the last man who knew everything, in the sense that, that was sort of the end of the era when it was really possible for someone to really have mastered all the sort of intellectual disciplines. Nowadays, one's lucky if one can even master, a particular sub-discipline of philosophy.
Yeah, that's right. And then that happens on the other side too. If there is a growing gulf between metaphysics and science, I think you could also see that coming from the science of science. So whereas 19th century physicists would read a lot of philosophy and write a lot of philosophy, like Hertz and people like that would read a lot, or even Einstein would read an awful lot of philosophy.
Right.
And
Ernst Mach. Yeah.
That's right. And in fact, if you think of catchy phrases, then what you could see it in the catchy phrases. You could see the difference when you think of Einstein and what he thinks of philosophy. He famously says something like, epistemology without science is how's it go? Science without epistemology is blind. Epistemology without science is empty.
Right. Which
Now,
is, of course, taking off on Kant's.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward to Feynman, and Feynman says, that he thinks philosophy of science is as useful to scientists as ornithology is to birds.
Right.
And so you can see the difference of opinion in sort of pre-World War II physics and post-World War II physics. I'm definitely on the Einstein side, or against Feynman, and that's why I find myself more middle of the road. I do think, actually, that birds, if they did know ornithology, would be in a superior position.
Good point.
Quite well.
Know thyself, yeah.
Yes, that's right. So anyway, that was just to put a little bit in historical context. If there is this kind of gulf, maybe
So,
it's overstated to some extent.
I mean, it seems like this gulf might sort of lead to potential problems or distortions in a couple of ways. So one way that it might lead to problems or distortions, which I'm quite concerned with, and which in the times when I get upset with metaphysicians is what I think is arising, is when metaphysicians are relying on what I think of as sort of an outdated or maybe sort of a Newtonian conception of what the physics is like. So I think Ladyman and Ross in some of their in their diatribes against metaphysics sometimes accuse metaphysicians of sort of doing a kind of a pseudoscientific investigation into what they call the philosophy of A-level chemistry or philosophy of high school chemistry or something like that. And I certainly think that that is a legitimate worry that some metaphysicians have sort of lost track of what sort of the more sophisticated physical theories are really saying about the world. But then there's a different sort of worry, and this might be the kind of worry where maybe we'll have some difference of opinion, where metaphysicians get into questions like the ones you were alluding to about whether there's two letters or one when there's the writing on both sides of the page, or when mereological composition occurs, such as example of when you fold your fingers together to make a fist, have you created some new whole mereological whole object? And it might seem as if these questions can be addressed without recourse to physics, or at least the metaphysicians who've addressed these questions have tended to address them, through intuitions and thought experiments and other methods of addressing the questions that haven't really tied them to the physics. And that I think some of the philosophers of science, Craig, you can tell me if you would count yourself as one of these people, would think that these debates have become spurious or sort of have become untethered from science.
Yes, I'm definitely one of those people. Yeah, to me, I find it. I can understand it as a kind of regimentation of concepts, um, but I guess I find many of the debates, especially maybe in Mariology, about what and various principles invoked there. Where are the where's the warrant for those particular principles? Is it if it's not coming from science? It seems like it's unconnected and completely from any science. It's hard to imagine any science caring about whether the fist is another object or not. Um, all the background theory is suggesting that this is, resolve that there's one thing there being described in two different ways. And so I have a hard time seeing. I mean, on the one hand, I know that eventually it could be that you never know, in cases where it seems like you have underdetermination in science, where you have underdetermination of theory by data, often, you might say, well, that's underdetermination of theory by data today, but maybe tomorrow that difference will show up in some way.
Possibly.
And that's certainly true. But on the other hand, if you're going to actually, if seems like you ought to have a prayer that the difference is going to make
Yeah,
a
I know what you
difference at
mean.
some point.
Right.
And
Right.
so some
So,
of these
some,
cases are ones where
yeah.
I don't see a prayer
Yeah.
of hope that difference is going to make a
Right.
difference.
I see that there can be sort of a difference in degree of how likely it seems that this is going to hook into sort of future empirical theorizing.
Right.
I guess one thing that I just wanted to sort of clarify about the Mariology case, you had said that there's just sort of one thing there and there's a difference in description. So just to go back to sort of the distinction I was making earlier about when a metaphysical debate is merely sort of a debate about sort of two theories that are notationally equivalent, or when we have sort of theories that are really saying different things about the world, but there's more just the skeptical worry that we can't tell which is the right one. It seems like, tell me if you intended this or I was just reading in, that you were thinking of the mereology debate more as a debate of the former sort, where there really isn't a substantive difference between the theories. It's just notational equivalence, and it's not a skeptical worry, but a sort of a kind of a worry about meaning. Would
Yeah,
that,
that's
yeah,
right. Yeah, in fact, maybe it's useful to say for the listeners. I mean, we could put everything, all these debates, on a kind of spectrum, where on one hand, on one side, you have things that are clear notational variants, like I describe, the dimensions of my computer and in terms of inches,
right,
and then I take it and describe it in terms of centimeters.
right,
Presumably, people don't think that that's describing two different physical systems, but rather just two
right.
descriptions of the same thing.
Yeah, and if we got into a debate over who got it right, when that would be a silly debate.
That's right. Yeah. No, I'm a centimetersist or something.
Yeah, right, right,
And then on the
yeah,
other end, there are definitely theories which would be let's restrict it to theories which are observationally equivalent, which for now predict the same range of observations. Then since neither of us are positivists, we both agree that there can be substantive, you know, disagreements between two theories they where there really is two theories, uh, even though they predict the same observations, and so there it's trickier to see sometimes exactly where to, So that's really the issue, I guess, before us is where on that spectrum do we say, nope, that's two theories, or nope, that's
yeah.
two descriptions? So there are
Right.
all
I think that's
these
a
other, curved space-time, so the positivists thought curved space-time and flat
right,
space-time with universal forces. I mean, so
right,
curved
sort of the
space-time,
Reichenbach stuff.
that's
Yeah,
right. So I think
yeah,
so Reichenbach would have thought that those are really notational variants.
yeah.
On the other hand, if you have an ounce of,
Mhm.
metaphysical realism in you or
Yeah.
the anti-empiricism in you, then you think, no, that really curved space-time is different than
Yeah, it's
flat
just a
space-time. It's
different
also,
view of the world. I feel I want to say.
yeah,
I mean, I think that's really an excellent way to put the point, and I think gets at some of the deepest issues in this terrain. Um, I really wish I had a general theory of when we had notational equivalence between theories. I think that's a really hard and deep issue. And if we could sort of have a general theory about when we had notational equivalence, we could try to plug it into various disputes, including the dispute about mereology, and say, hey, one side thinks that, when we have here's two things, that there's just two things, and the other side thinks there's a third thing, which is the fusion of the two things. Are they just speaking in different languages and saying the same thing, or um, are they really having different views of the world here?
that's right. And
So,
yeah, just to give so that's maybe in a way the message here from this discussion is that that's one place where we'll definitely agree is that it would be really, really nice if we had a theory of
yeah.
metaphysical equivalence, and yet neither of us have one sort of in our back pocket. I mean, I guess what
So in
you'd be.
some ways, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say. Uh, so we both would agree that it's more than just a mapping from onto the same observables. If the two theories are both mapped into the same observables, well, that's not enough to say that they're equivalent. What about the structure? What do you mean by structure? Um, are the Lagrangian and Hamiltonian theories the same, describing the same world, or
Great question. Great
are
question.
the Schrodinger
Jill Miller.
version versus Heisenberg version of quantum mechanics? So most physicists, well, most everyone, I don't know anyone who thinks that they're describing different worlds. But in the Schrodinger case, this quantum state moves with time, and the observables stay the same. In the Heisenberg, it's the reverse. People think of those as the same world, even though they're not exactly mathematically equivalent. Um, so it's a tricky issue, and so normally you're looking at theoretical virtues, explanatory virtues, and so if we return to the mereological cases, then I'm thinking that in those cases you're just not really going to get uh, sufficient theoretical virtues uh, to warrant teasing those two descriptions
Right.
apart into two
But
different
when you say
worlds.
to warrant, it sounds there like you're going more for the skeptical realist position. So I guess so. Just to
Ooh.
state the way I think about the mereological case, and maybe this will be a point of dispute between us. I think of the mereological case as one where there really is a substantive difference in the theories. Hey, one theory says that that there's just two things that exist. I'm not doing this right. There we go. That there's just two things that exist that I'm holding up, and the other theory says that there's three, and that's a real difference in terms of the number of things that a theory thinks that there are. That's by my lights. I mean, well, neither of us has a general account of notational equivalence, but we have some intuitions about particular cases, some intuitions about when theories are really giving us different views of the world, and when they're just expressing the same view of the world in sort of clothed in different linguistic garb. Sort of seems to me that theories that just differ about the number of things that exist really are portraying the world to be different. That's how I think about the mereology case.
Okay, yeah, so there we disagree.
Yeah, no,
Because, so there I think not just that we won't know who's right eventually, but that really they are the same theory. Um, Subject to like a couple of provisos. That is, and this is again coming back to the theme of it being kind of untethered to science. So the notion of a thing, uh, hasn't been connected to any science since caveman days. I think. Um,
um,
and so if we explicate it as by thing, if we meant, I don't know, fundamental particle or quantum field, or I don't know how you individuate quantum field bits, but something like that, then I think it could, So if by thing we meant something more specific, like then
oh,
I think that there would be an issue.
well,
Uh,
so
if it's not, then I don't see how it's not just regimentation of what we mean
okay.
by the word thing.
Right. I mean, the idea. I mean, the sort of the metaphysician's use of thing is an attempt to speak about sort of entities in the broadest possible sense. I guess there's sort of different usages. Some people.
I guess I'm
So
skeptical
I.
about that. What
Right.
the broadest entities in the broadest possible sense.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, well, for instance, you used certain sorts of entities in speaking of particles, in speaking of fields. Um, So it might be that we can group that we can. There are sort of traditional categories for thinking about entities like object and property and event. It might be that that we can associate particles and fields with some of the traditional categories. I would think so, but that's a disputed point. Like someone like Tim Maudlin, for instance,
Right.
thinks that we might need a recategorization. But in any case, there'll be some categorization, be it the old traditional one. So I think of particles as objects, fields as properties, but that that's a disputed issue. Even if we have to recategorize things, there'll still be, I would think, some categorization of types of entities.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have this notion of an entity, and we can speak of, well, how many entities do we have? So I'm kind of optimistic that this talk of thing or entity is this sort of really general talk that shouldn't be sort of discarded and will sort of survive different recategorizations that physics might suggest. But I mean, you might dispute that.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, put it all in terms of particles, and then it would be relatively clear. Um, I think. Well, then the theory will give an unambiguous answer.
Right.
It's by
Sure.
putting in things that aren't in the theory that you get that the ambiguity arises, I think.
I mean, it just seems like if we have any notion, I mean, when you say things that aren't in the theory, you mean things that aren't in the physics.
Well, I
I
guess
mean,
I guess I would think the same. I mean, we could take any theory really. So I suppose we were just looking at biological theory, then maybe I think I would probably say the same.
But, I mean, well, the metaphysician can formulate her own theories, and she can do so even in this particular debate. Actually, she can use just the language of first-order logic with the identity sign to formulate claims about the number of entities that exist. So, to say that two entities exist is to say that there exists an x, and there exists a y, such that x doesn't equal y, and for all z, z equals x or z equals y. And that's a sort of regimented way of saying that there's exactly two entities in the language of first-order logic with the identity sign.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think that this that a theory expressed in first-order logic with identity is has a clear and unambiguous meaning, and maybe you deny that, maybe you don't think that logic has a kind of a meaning to it, then we can just formulate the question of whether there's exactly two things. In the case where I held up the two books, exactly two things that I'm holding up, or a third thing, which is namely the sum of the two of them that I'm holding up in addition. We can formulate the question of whether there's exactly two things or a third thing in this very minimal language that seems really sort of clear in meaning, but maybe you dispute the clarity of it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, something's going to have to correspond to thing or something like that, right? I mean, so if I held up, if you held up instead of two books, if you held up a particle and another particle, if you could, and then you asked whether there were two particles there or three particles there, or sorry, two. You're gonna have to use some kind of vocabulary over and above the particle vocabulary
Absolutely.
to get the question going.
Right.
At that point, I want to retrench. I think so that I can't get that question going.
But surely you think that there's, I mean, well, maybe not, that there's not just particles, but there's things like tables and chairs and books and trees and people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. So I was thinking that particles, tables and chairs and books and people and trees and whatever, are all entities, or well, are all have something in common. They all fall. They're all a certain sort. Maybe they all count as objects, and objects are a particular type of entity. So we can ask how many objects are there. And that doesn't bias the question of whether there are mereological wholes, whether there's just the two little things, or whether there's also a third thing that has one part here and one part there.
what's the motivation for introducing the term objects there? In which to even ask that question.
I guess I kind of didn't think I was introducing the term, but just reminding us of a term that we all knew and understood, and that thinkers, including philosophers, have been making reference to, for the entirety of sort of the philosophical tradition, at least. So I was just thinking that, hey, we have this notion of an object, and we can just ask interesting questions about it, like, how many are there? And that's an interesting question. And we can try to debate different views about how many objects there are, and possibly there'll be some downstream connection to empirical results, but it's kind of an open question whether there'll be an empirical way of trying to decide between the views.
Yeah, that's where I really have. Well, I have trouble with the motivation because just because we have the concept doesn't mean that it's worth spending a lot of money and time to figure out. I mean, there are many common sense things which are confused, and but also.
But it seems like we shouldn't start. I guess I don't start off with the attitude that the common sense concept is confused, though I could be convinced that it is. It just seems like a pretty clear and natural notion. that I can ask interesting questions about. I can ask interesting questions about tables and books as well. And maybe those will turn out to be confused concepts as well, though it'd be surprising.
But I guess I just don't see any possible connection to. You said that maybe there'll be some, empirical testing of it downstream, but it's really hard to see, whether what's the empirical test between if you have two whether the two books or three book or three sorry two objects or three objects there. It's really very hard to see what test is gonna what pointer is gonna point to the three versus the two.
Right. Though this sounds like more the skeptical realist. So that's why I sort of want to clarify, sort of saying that there's no difference there's no difference between the two sides versus saying that there's a difference, but it's hard if not impossible to test out which side has the true view. I do think though that there is some potential. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
Suppose somebody made that defense of the centimeters, inches case. What would you say?
Neither of us, of course, has a general theory of notational equivalence, so we're both sort of stumbling around over these cases. But in that sort of case, I want to say that were they measuring, was it your computer screen? I forget what they were measuring.
Right.
That both sides have the same view of the world, that there's your computer screen, and it has certain properties, and moreover, the property that the centimeterist attributes to the computer screen is not in conflict with the property that the inchist attributes to your computer screen. So I would explain how the computer screen can have both properties compatibly, and so there isn't a debate in that case. But I would say in the Mariology case, if one side says that there's exactly two objects, and the other side says that there's exactly three objects, that it can't be that there's both exactly two and exactly three. These are inconsistent.
We could just put subscripts on what we mean by object.
That's right.
Just like you're doing in the centimeter inches case, really, by I don't know, if I said it's 8 units of measurement across, and you said it's 10 or whatever. Well, it wouldn't be 10, but whatever the conversion is, was it 2.54 centimeters to an inch or something like that. So anyway, whatever. And then I say, well, by unit of length, I meant I put a sub index centimeters, and you do it for inches, and then we say shake hands and go away and say we agreed.
Yeah.
Why can't we do the same thing for objects in that case?
In part because the use of objects at issue is to be understood, or at least the metaphysician hopes, is to be understood in this sort of all-inclusive way. And so I think it would actually be a consequence of the way you're thinking about things for the subscripting, that the person who thinks that there's three objects would have actually won the debate. So so we might think that if we subscript sort of objects subparticles, we'll get that there's there's exactly two objects subparticles. But if we subscript objects sort of a more general thing that includes both sort of small and big things, objects subgeneral, then we get three objects subgeneral. Since the debate was supposed to be about how many objects there are in this general sense, that's really, I would think of it as a way of saying that the person who thinks that there's exactly three objects, generally speaking, has won the debate, and a way for her to explain away the intuitions that some people might have that there's only two objects there, meaning, you might have been using object in this more restricted sense to mean just tiny things or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, then it seems like you could do three indices. One for the more general, one for the one which allows these Mariological sums, and one which is more restrictive. Say, with respect to the more general one, number 2 is 1, or. But
sorry.
So I'm trying to. So I'm imagining, the two normal positions with respect to the objects. Thinking one is some indices one and another one being indexed by two,
Oh, yeah.
and then now for the more general, all-inclusive sense, let's call that object sub three, and then in that which includes one or two,
Right.
and then in that case, I guess the two guy wins
Right.
according to
But it
three's
seems like
standards. But really,
one,
there's it would
one
take 20 seconds to sort out who meant what in a conversation about this.
oh, but I mean, well, so two things that I just want to say. One is that once you give me even these subscripted notions of object, I can then formulate questions about them. I can say, oh, okay, so, even you, oh, anti-metaphysician, though I know you're not totally an anti-metaphysician, but, I can say, even you, oh, anti-metaphysician, grant that there's this notion of objects sub, 2 or objects sub 3 or what have you. Now let's ask, how many objects sub 2 are there? How many objects sub 3 are there? And it just seems like a meaningful question. Are there 2? Are there 3? Are there however many? And the people who don't think that mereological composition occurs, some people think it never occurs, some people think it only occurs under very restricted circumstances, they will deny that, they'll say, in the case, again, I'm holding, dropping things as I'm trying to set up my props. I'm holding up the two books. They'll deny that there are 3 things there. They'll say, no, there's still only 2. Even in the most general, they'll deny that there's 3 objects even in the most general sense. They'll say there's only 2 objects in the most general sense of object. So, and that's where the debate is, in this most general sense of object.
Yeah, I
So,
I have trouble with
I,
the motivating interest in the most general sense of object, and I mean if
but
it's not, I don't know. Again, I don't have a theory of metaphysical equivalence, and so I
yeah,
can't
no, that's, yeah.
say. I mean, but the whole time I can picture a centimetersist and an inchist making similar sorts of moves.
But it seems like once the subscripting moves have been made, it seems like the mereological question can still be raised. How many objects sub x are there for, pick your x? Whereas the foot centimeter dispute, the inch centimeter dispute, seems to go away once the subscripting is in. I'm not suggesting that as sort of a decisive criterion, but I think that that's suggestive, at least. I did want to sort of speak to the issue about whether there actually could be empirical upshot to the mereological dispute. Because actually, I'm a little more optimistic about that than you are. Because I do think that there's cases in physics where we see reference in our physical theories to notions like an open region and to notions like a path, where it's, the way that I understand sort of metrics to be done is through sort of path length. And a path seems like, well, paths can be bigger than points, so these seem to be sort of big things that seem to be required, at least in the standard ways that I know of thinking of sort of physical metrics. So you might think, well, hey, physics requires, at the very least, that there are some things that are bigger than points, namely paths. And then that maybe gives us a little bit of insight coming from the physics as to kind of minimal conditions for, we have to have at least this many big things. I don't know if you think that can be at all of use.
Big things. What do you mean by that?
Paths.
Why?
Well, if there are distances, and if distance is given by
given that
length of the shortest path.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I take it our best physics, I defer to you on matters of physics, but I take it our best physics
be so wise.
speaks of, given my knowledge, it would be, but our best physics, I take it, speaks of distances.
Right.
And our best understanding of how it does so is through path length.
Mm-hmm.
And this requires positing paths with lengths. so as far as I
which
understand.
requires more than a point.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's your point, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And it may be, I mean, you could have a very restricted theory of compositions as, oh, composition occurs only when you have a path and never otherwise. It would be a strange, no metaphysician has voiced that theory. But I mean, that I think maybe that would be okay as far as empirical stuff. But, you know, but there are a fair number of metaphysicians think, well, composition never occurs or almost never occurs except under sort of conditions like, for instance, von Inwagen says it only occurs when the result is something that's alive. Paths are not alive. So he wouldn't think that there are paths.
Whoa.
I mean, he will in fact have some sort of, he has some clever strategies for trying to paraphrase away these claims. So I don't mean to suggest that he's out of moves, but just to suggest that sort of our best physics could potentially speak about certain big things. I mean, I actually think our best physics speaks about the whole cosmos. That's a whole other issue that I don't want to get into. So if you think of things in terms of giving like the wave function of the universe, then hey, it looks on face like we're just directly talking about the whole universe. That's another case where you might think that the physics is just directly speaking about big things.
Right, but I think acknowledging that physics is speaking about big things isn't itself to acknowledge that the debates about how many objects there are. I mean, to import this object in its most general sense, talk, is then legitimate. I mean, I think it's pretty clear how you can individuate subsystems of the universe from the grand system of it all. But there are ways to do it in the physics, and so I don't know. I don't know what's gained by adding. Maybe it'll help to. I mean, so one example I mentioned, and a paper I wrote is there are papers in the philosophy literature saying that that there, according to the ordinary conception of object, there are objects which travel faster than the speed of light.
Oh, right, the Hudson
Right.
stuff. Yeah.
And and of course, those objects don't have mass energy or anything like this, and so it's not positing a violation of any physical law.
Right. This is like Wesley Salmon has the example of the spot of light
on
the wall of the Astrodome.
That's right. Yeah. Or you could imagine, shining. Imagine you had a big movie screen right around the whole solar system and had a big floodlight and moved that light along. And if the conditions of identity through time, or if that light, as you swept that thing along, it would be moving much faster than the light.
Right.
And physics, things like the group velocity and stuff like this can move faster than light, and so you can, but you know that you're not really positing of any particular object with, so you're not positing it as something that's violating the physics in any way.
Well, I mean, the physics I take in the first instance rules out superluminal signaling. But I mean, I guess there's a question of whether the notion of thing is sort of built into relativity. If the prohibition is against things going faster than light, or just against signaling going in a superluminal manner. So there's some question about sort of how to think about what the physics is saying.
Oh yeah, that's right. There's definitely a lot of interesting issues about what you mean when you want the world to be, what Lorentz invariance exactly entails and prohibits and allows. But these aren't cases about on the margins of that. I don't think, and so I just don't see any utility in thinking about these objects, which are, you could call them these objects, but I don't see any. I mean, no. I see.
That sounds like a third worry. So you could worry that there's no difference in meaning. You could worry that there's no way to tell. You could say there's a difference in meaning, but no way to tell who's right. You'd have a third worry. Hey, maybe there's a difference in meaning. Maybe we can even tell who's right. But who cares? What turns on this? That sounds like maybe more of the concern expressed here.
Yeah, that's a good
Um,
point. Yeah, that's
and I guess in some, I feel that's a concern that I do think is pressing for a lot of these metaphysical disputes. Though, sometimes one just gets interested in a question, and it just becomes of intrinsic interest. Especially when the question, I think often with these questions, it's not clear what upshot, if any, they'll have in other domains. So they certainly see this in sort of with pure mathematics. Sometimes people just sort of pursue pure mathematics for its own sake, and they have no view as to whether there'll be any sort of physical application of the pure mathematics. And hey, sometimes it just turns out, wow, this sort of little sort of technology that we've developed in the pure mathematics turns out to be really sort of have a useful and interesting application. And that's kind of so. Sometimes I feel like well, at least when I'm doing metaphysics, I'm sort of doing something a bit analogous to this kind of like pure kind of play with uh, 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 what's uh, without any assumption yet that this will be sort of that this will connect or not.
hmm
That's okay, I think.
yeah, and I'd like to distinguish the position I think I have from one nearby, where a lot of the people who are skeptics about what's going on in some of metaphysics, there's a lot of decrying of the use of intuition and wild speculation and that, and I don't find myself pulled that way because when I look at the history of science or just the history of ideas really, a lot of the best things have come from wild speculation, right? Uh, it's hard to you can't really see Einstein's relativity as coming from a bunch of you know deductive arguments that Einstein had from the data or anything, right? It
Right.
was a few interesting leaps, and intuition played a large role in his in coming up with the theory. Um, but I guess I do think that there's a difference between, and here's where I have this kind of I don't know, systems demarcation or something where if you can't really tell the problem of figuring out the difference between science and pseudoscience has historically been a big problem in philosophy of science, and it's of course a historical failure. So no good, certainly no necessary and sufficient conditions for being science as opposed to pseudoscience has ever been produced, and I wouldn't I think hope that no listener ever holds his breath, his or her breath, waiting for one.
Mm.
But that said, it's a case, and maybe this is a case like that, where
Mm-hmm.
it's. I mean, anyone that have ever thought about the science versus pseudoscience case says it's funny because you can't state the criterion, but it's easy to state particulars where
Yeah.
where judgments align, and so astrology on one side, astronomy on the other, and I think what's happening is that there are all the good theory will have all these different virtues, some empirical, some theoretical. So empirical virtues are ones related to observations. Theoretical virtues might be things like how unifying they are, how how simple they are, and things like that. And you can see this fight. So there's always a trade-off among virtues, or often a trade-off. You could get more coverage if you're less simple, but you want to get the thing simple, so you cover less.
Right.
Uh, and so, and then you also have the trade-off between the empirical and theoretical virtues.
Mm.
And so you see a fight in science itself about this, right? So as you're having this debate in metaphysics and metametaphysics, there's also in physics debates about whether string theory is metaphysics or physics.
Right.
And there the
Yeah.
issue is, the people who complain about string theory say, well, it's they're prizing the empirical virtues at the expense of alleged theoretical virtues, and the string theorists are fighting back and saying, no, unification, theoretical virtues, that's the way to go.
Right.
Um, and so you could
Yeah.
so you could see a sort of parallel issue here. I and I tend to think that unless the intuitions, I mean, so not wanting to go out and prohibit people from speculating or that or using intuition, but if people are intuiting certain possibilities, then I think that those possibilities and necessities that are arising that people are intuiting really ought to be treated as seriously as the theory that they're producing. And so if it's a theory with many theoretical virtues or empirical virtues, a theory with many virtues, then the possibilities and necessities that are coming from that, I will then want to treat very seriously. But if it's kind of stray intuitions about uh, possibilities and necessities, that are ungrounded by a theory or not, or by a theory that's not covering much or without many virtues, then I just think, maybe describing a different world. So, like you say, it's more an instance of another type of sin than the centimeters inches debate. Um, but still committing some kind of sin.
Got it. I mean, it seems like we could have sort of different sort of total theories of what the world is like. From, maybe, mine has mereological composition taking place, so I've got big things made out of small things, and yours doesn't have mereological composition taking place, so you've just got little things. And we can talk about whether there's empirical upshot to that, like whether, which of our views best fits with physics, but we can also talk about the theoretical virtues attendant upon our different views. Like maybe my view can claim the mantle of methodological conservatism in the sense of sort of better fitting our prior intuitions. Maybe your view can claim the mantle of ontological economy in positing less things. So there may even be sort of a trade-off. So I don't think of this kind of case, at least, as a case where the theoretical virtues sort of don't enter into the discussion, but rather, I think this is actually characteristic of a lot of metaphysical disputes. Really, there are big differences in the kind of theoretical virtues that the different views can lay claim to respecting. So you're often looking at like trade-offs between sort of ontological economy and sort of elegance or sort of explanatory coherence. And that just like in physics, you can have disputes between theories that sort of focus mainly on the theoretical virtues rather than sort of empirical predictions. So, I mean, a lot of metaphysical disputes to me are kind of just sort of an even more extreme version of that, where there is maybe no difference in the empirical stuff, but there's still big differences in the kind of theoretical virtues that are getting respected. So there seems to be, in addition to the claim, I was saying with the mereology dispute, that there is a potential empirical upshot. I would also want to say that there's also a potential sort of theoretical virtue argument to be made, actually in different ways for the different sides of the dispute. So I think there's actually sort of a fair amount to go on in trying to address the question, and also in sort of thinking of it as an interesting question.
Yeah, on that very issue, let me say, I mean, I agree in some cases and disagree in other cases, I guess. That is, so when the charge is sometimes made, you two metaphysicians, you look like you disagree, but really you agree. The metaphysicians will then sometimes say, well, you've got underdetermination of theory by data and science, and then you resort to theoretical virtues to try to, to fight at that level. And we're just doing the same thing in metaphysics. It's just all inference to the best explanation, and we're fighting about what the best explanation is.
Right.
And I guess I think I agree with that in general. So I think that's so. For instance, in a debate that I think is a genuine metaphysical debate, would be somebody who thinks that there's discrete space-time versus somebody who thinks that it's continuous.
Right.
And there I would say, unless quantum gravity comes up with some discrete version, then you have it might be possible to write down all of physics in a discrete way. Um, it seems like the empirical data doesn't demand that. It's not like you could ever tell. No, not like pointers that are going to tell you whether it has to be represented by a continuum or not. It's never going to make the full use of all the real numbers structure. But the fact is, you can write it down. You can write down the physics, Newtonian mechanics, quantum mechanics, and using assuming the space and time are a continuum, and it might be possible, but no one's done it yet, and so it seems like in any attempt so far it has been really pretty ugly. So the discrete side, seems to lose on the theoretical virtues, and so there's a case where I would agree, but on the other hand, I do think sometimes that claim, well, we're just using inference to the best explanation, just like you, is kind of I think, yeah, right, buddy. That's not a best. That I think sometimes the cases are just not, and this comes back to my point before, where I think that the possibilities and necessities are only as strong as the theory, and if the theory is just covering such a modest amount and offering so little, then I tend to think, well, that you can say officially you're using inference to the best explanation, but really neither of these explanations are all that good. And so,
it might be the best of a bad lot.
Yeah, or the two the two best of a bad lot, or something.
Right, but that seems like sort
like
of
an inch theory,
a substantive way to engage in the metaphysical debate. So you could say, okay, so it seems like if like you and I, or sort of imagine that I'm engaged with another metaphysician in a debate over whether composition has taken place or when it does, and you come in and you say, hey. The answer to this question is disconnected from the rest of our theory, and B, both the answers being suggested are sort of roughly tied in overall theoretical virtuousness. Then it seems like you would have made a good case for a kind of what I would think of then as a kind of skeptical, like, well, there's really no way for us to tell who's right, kind of attitude towards the debate. But it seems like, by my lights at least, and maybe this sort of actually gets at a kind of ambiguity in what it is to be sort of pro-metaphysics, anti-metaphysics. I would see you at that point as actually engaging in the metaphysical debate with us, and as sort of, you'd be, I would be claiming that, hey, my theory has more theoretical virtues than my opponent's. My opponent would say, no, it's my theory that has the virtues. And you'd be engaging in that debate by saying, actually, no, both theories are actually, roughly equally virtuous when all sort of theoretical virtues are put on the scale. So that would be an engagement. And then you'd also be adding, and moreover, whichever theory we choose between wouldn't really matter to the rest of our total theory. And that might also be, I might say, oh no, it would matter tremendously to our total theory for various reasons, like maybe I try to bring in the, paths or some other, some other considerations. So I guess I should, by my lights, that would be a kind of, that would be to engage in metaphysics. But maybe by your lights, that wouldn't be. And that might be a point where we might be talking past each other and sort of, or the pro-metaphysician and the anti-metaphysician might sort of be talking past each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I know that,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to sort of talk a little bit more about the case of discrete and continuous time and other issues connected to time, because I think that's an example that harbors a lot. The time example harbors a lot of interesting cases where we might have some agreements and some disagreements as well.
That's right. It's useful. It would be useful for people to see that this, highfalutin debate, can have real consequences for which philosophical problems are. Well, if you're, a grad student trying to pick what dissertation topic you would want to work on, it would be nice if you worked on one which was a real problem versus a pseudo problem.
Good advice.
Now, unfortunately, we don't have any resolution on these things, but still, given our differing opinions, I would, for instance, I mean, yeah, sort of, I put it like that just to make it a little more, I don't know, dramatic maybe, but I would not recommend, for instance, a grad student to work on a dissertation on whether I am right now, I'm Craig Callender, this particular time moment of time, this little slice of me now, whether I am Craig Callender, this three-dimensional object at this time, or Craig Callender is this the four-dimensional worm through world line through space-time. That I tend to think is really just a two different descriptions of the same thing.
Oh, okay. So you're so this is a no difference in meaning notational equivalence claim that you'd make about that.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and make the go for the stronger reading.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so on the whole perdurance endurance business, I think I could translate back and forth between the two easily, and of course translation itself is not, and of course observationally they're equivalent. But also I don't see any.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be completely orthogonal to the structure of space-time, what events exist as of other times. So I just can't for the life of me see how one theory could play. Again, I can't see the future, but it's very hard for me to see how those two theories could really end up, that anything could matter about which one you chose.
This sounds like the third sort of worry. So you start off saying no difference in meaning, and now it sounds like it's more like, well, it wouldn't matter which one, which was more like what I was thinking was the third sort of worry about metaphysics. Not that the theories mean the same thing or that there's no way to tell who's right, but that it wouldn't matter who's right. I guess I was thinking, just to speak to the sort of endurance-perdurance debate, that it's a bit like the mereology debate in terms of it's a by my lights a real difference in what the world is like. That actually we can formulate the difference really just in the number of objects that exist. So if we imagine, just to take a super simplified case, imagine a world with just two moments of time, T1 and T2, and a single particle. The endurance theorist thinks that there's one object, the particle, that exists at T1 and that also exists at T2. Whereas the perdurance person thinks there's actually two things. There's the sort of the time slice thing, the sort of particle at T1, and there's particle at T2, and those are two non-identical things. So I think of just like in the mereology case, it's really just you can think of it as a dispute over how many things there are out there.
So, well, just like in the mereology case, then we will disagree, because I think it's kind of nutty to think that those two views are really disagreeing, as opposed to just disagreeing about terms.
Yeah.
I know, that, so I don't know, are there an infinity of, so then there's a real question in the case of me, are there an infinity of me's, or, because I can keep subdividing the time interval over which me, the four-dimensional object, exists. Are there an infinity of me's or just one me? It seems like if I do the index 3D me's versus 4D me's, then
Well, this is actually, again, I think that to do the indexing is actually to give the 4D, in the way that I take it you're imagining, is to give the 4D the victory, because the 3D thinks that there's just one U. Or sorry, I don't want to do it in terms of U's, but just one object at issue. So if you're saying that there are these time slice objects, infinitely many of them, then I should say, there's different ways of trying to say what the difference is between the endurantist and the perdurantist view. I think there's sort of a number of different, actually, theses that we can distinguish that tend to be sort of a cluster of theses.
Mm.
But at least one thesis is a thesis about, to go back to my example with the particle, because it's just I think a simpler case.
Right.
Whether this is a world with exactly one thing or a world with exactly two things. And if you think that is this sense of this subscripted sense of that gives the 4D'er what she wants to say, then I think by my lights that would be to side with the 4D'er in that controversy. The 3D'er will say there's no sense of there's no in the most general sense of thing, there's still only one.
Yeah, but still, the 4D'er could say, yeah, according to your 3D vocabulary, there are two things, and according to my, one thing. Wait, I've got myself. There's according to my 4D vocabulary, there's one thing, and according to your 3D, there's two things.
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, the other way. Sorry. Can't they say that? And then
I don't think they can say that so readily. It's a question. It's a question of whether the 4D vocabulary expresses a truth or not. So if there is so when the 4D'er says,
oh, you're taking the denial of 4D into what it means in the 3D.
I'm thinking that in just to work with this really simplified sort of particle in two instants of time scenario. What the 4D'er is, at least one thesis associated with 4D, is that this is a scenario on which there are two things in the most general sense of thing. So if that, and the 3D'er is denying that, is saying this is a scenario in which there's only one thing on the most general sense of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have these subscripts, then we can sort of, or if you think that the 4D'er is saying something that's true in her proprietary vocabulary, then I think the 4D'er, that's just a victory for the 4D'er.
Yeah, I guess I'm missing the point, I think, as to why the 4D'er wins, why they're not just both symmetrical.
So I'm thinking that there is this, and maybe this is the point of dispute, that there is this notion of being an object or a thing in the most general sense.
Okay,
being an entity, being the sort of thing that in logic we could give sort of an individual term for, so we could formulate these claims about the number of entities, number of things that there are in terms of quantification and identity.
Yeah, once again, yeah, we'll disagree. I think why import all of that? I mean, we've just got a world with two. I mean, we know exactly. Suppose the theory has matter and energy, and we've got a little bit of blob of matter and energy at T1, and a little blob of matter and energy at T2.
Right.
Then we could either we can stitch now when we think of identity, we can now an identity through time. We can stitch or not stitch these things together.
When you said that there was matter, when you said that there was matter at T1 and matter at T2, are you saying it's the same matter or different matter at T? How much matter? How many bits of matter are there in the total universe on this theory?
At one time or at two times?
No, overall, all times.
All right. There's just some blob of matter, say 3 grams of matter. At T1, and there's 3 grams of matter at T2.
Is it the same 3 grams of matter at T1 or is it T2, or is the theory just agnostic on that?
As you wish. I can stitch together the identity.
It's your theory. Sorry. It's your theory. I mean, when you say "as you wish," it seems like either the theory. It was your theory, so it could say what it wants. Either it says that they're identical or it doesn't. Or it says nothing on the matter.
Yeah, but I don't want to have to say something about it, whether they're the same in the most general sense. Uh, so
I'm just
maybe
thinking if a
maybe
theory
maybe the
has a, I mean, I'm just thinking if a theory posits certain entities like certain bits of matter,
hmm
it just needs to tell us. Um, Otherwise, it's, I mean, it could be an incomplete theory that doesn't sort of completely sort of tell us everything
no,
about
no.
what it's
Let's
talking about.
suppose it's complete. Yeah. So and suppose
Right.
we
So it
call
just
it.
needs to tell us whether the bit of matter that it's positing at T1 is the same as the bit of matter that is identical to the bit of matter that it's positing at T2 or not. So it's just a question of it's got these two terms, if you like. It's got little, let little x be the bit of matter at T1, let little y be the bit of matter at T2, and now it asks, oh, does x equal y?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're forcing. I mean, so. Um, I mean, suppose it's a field, right? And it just says there's
Oh, field.
3 grams. The value at that space time
Right.
point is 3 grams, and the value at the other one is 3 grams.
Oh, yeah,
Now you
good.
could
So I
then come
think,
in and say, well, that's the same thing. That's some kind of little tiny golf ball or something. But
right. I want to think of fields a bit differently. I alluded to this super briefly earlier that I want to actually think of fields in terms of properties. So I think the field theoretically, the way I would think about the theory is it's positing space-time points. As you said, you've got the field intensity at this point and the field intensity at that point. So you're positing points. And now I can ask my identity questions about, oh, is this the same point as that or not? If it's a space-time theory, presumably it won't. They
right,
won't be. The points won't be identical. And then I mean, the field is basically just giving me a function from the points to certain mathematical entities. Um, so I think of that as, and I would think of that in terms of a property. If you want to think of that as some, new ontological category, we can dispute that as well. But um, we've got points and we've got certain values that we're finding at those points.
right. Okay. So now if I say there are 2 points, those are two
Okay.
points.
Yeah.
Um, Now what do you say?
So so I think this is a theory that actually doesn't. This, by my lights, this is a theory that um, either should be thought of as one that doesn't have objects at all. It just has space-time and properties of space-time, or that identifies objects. This is actually the way I prefer to do it, but this is a separate issue. That identifies objects with points of space-time. So I'd say all that particles are on this theory are points of space-time. So I'd say this is a theory whose total ontology is, or whose individuals are space-time points, and gives you and tells you how many space-time points there are. Um,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it'll matter whether we think of space-time as continuous or discrete, actually, in determining how many space-time points there are. But maybe it says that there's continuum many space-time points. So it's giving you a sort of it's answering the question of how many entities, or at least how many space-time points there are. And then it's telling you what the space-time points are like. And that's what the field does. It sort of tells you, it assigns properties to the points. That's how I would think of that kind of world.
And so the objects are the space-time points.
That's how I would, yes, that's how I would think of, that's how I think of field theory generally. But, I appreciate that this is a very controversial, and there's big issues about, sort of ontological interpretation of these style.
Oh yeah. No, I didn't want to raise that. I just yeah. So and then another option you said was just that there are no objects in this theory.
Yeah. If you think that material objects just are kind of categorically distinct from space-time points, so that there's no, it would be like a category mistake to identify material objects with space-time points,
Mm-hmm.
then I think, okay, if you think that, this is not a view that I hold, but if you think that, then you'd have to, well, hey, this theory just has space-time points. Doesn't have material objects, and material objects are allegedly categorically distinct from space-time points. It just doesn't have any of these categorically distinct sorts of entities. It just has the space-time points. That's the way I would think of the theory on the assumption that which I wouldn't grant, that material objects are distinct from space-time points.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it
But
seems.
the
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
just to say that it seems like in all these cases, the theory is positing some proprietary domain of entities, be it material objects, be it space-time points, be it both. And there's just going to be pretty straightforward identity questions that we can ask about the proprietary entities that the theory posits. When do we have one? When do we have two? And so I was thinking that with the endurance-perdurance debate, just to go back to my previous example of the particle and the two instants of time, if the theory is positing a particle, as I was imagining, we can just ask the straightforward identity question. Hey theory, how many particles are you positing? One or two?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the debate is. I mean, and maybe it's a debate that's going to be really hard to resolve, certainly.
Well, I just want to say, at one time or at all times.
At all times. No.
Well, then,
if you think that it's trivial that there's two, then you're siding against the enduratists, against the 3D'er. So the 3D'er, as I'm thinking of her, at least in terms of one of the cluster of theses that I would identify with endurantism/3Dism, would say that there's just a single particle that's, as it were, sweeping through time, that's wholly present at the two different times. Just one particle present through the two times. Whereas the perdurantist 4D'er says, no, there's actually two particles there, two time slices, if you like, at the two different times. So if you think that when we're talking about all times, that it's just obvious that there's two particles, then I think, well, then I think you're just thinking that it's obvious that the 4D'er perdurantist has the right view. And I would kind of agree with that. I'm a 4D'er, I don't know, obvious, but I'm a 4D'er myself. But I mean, I think there is an interesting dispute.
Yeah, I just don't see how it's interesting. I think you're getting that the 4D'er wins there only by, I don't know, foisting the concept of, in its most general sense or something on me. And so I don't really see, I just can't see how it could be interesting. I mean,
Actually, in this case, I'm not even asking you to use object in the most general sense. Actually, I can do this one in terms of the vocabulary that you like, just in terms of particles. I can say, how many particles are there throughout time? Not restricted to a particular time, but how many particles are there throughout time? And in my very simple scenario, the 3D'er says 1 and the 4D'er says 2.
Well, I think maybe we're talking past it. I mean, I think of the 4D'er is saying that the whole world line is a particle, right?
Oh, yeah, so this is the difference between the worm and the stage versions of 4D theory?
Oh, maybe, so that's why we're having trouble here. Okay.
Sorry, yeah, I was assuming the stage version.
I kept thinking.
I appreciate that there are subtleties here. But even then, I can, if you grant me...
I just kept coming up with one.
right. And that's why before we,
okay.
sorry. I should have been more explicit about the version of 4D theory that I was assuming. But I can at least say this. There's the stage theorist and the 3D'er. And they have this dispute. And that seems a substantive dispute. Now there's also the worm theorist and the 3D'er. And also we can compare the worm theorist to the stage theorist. And I think there's, if you grant me the notions of parthood, which maybe you won't, because that is sort of embroiled. That is the sort of that is a mereological notion, so it's embroiled in our theory of parts and wholes. Then I can say, with the worm theorist will say that there's one particle, but that it has two proper parts: the time 1 proper part and the time 2 proper part. Whereas the 3D'er, I'm assuming that particles, by the way, are sort of mereologically simple, at least at a given time. They don't have any parts. The 3D'er will say that the particle has no proper parts whatsoever. There's just one mereologically simple entity that sweeps across T1 and T2. So to to compare the 3D with the worm version of 4D, I'll need recourse to the notion of parta, and that might be problematic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think it will be. Then it will. Then we will reprise what we said about Mariology, I think.
It seems like to me like the notion of parthood in general, yeah, okay, well, maybe we're going to reprise some of it. Seems like the notion of parthood in general is, by my lights at least, a really sort of, about as clear a natural concept as we have. I can, in virtually every case, here's the, here's the book, and here's the page of the book, and the page of the book is a part of the book. There's a pretty well established logic for Mariology, though there's dispute about the best overall logic, but there's certain sort of logical features like irreflexivity, for proper part, irreflexivity, asymmetry, transitivity, and it looks like this is going to, our best physics, talks about things like paths understood in terms of structures, in terms of points, things like open regions when we do the topology. So I'm kind of thinking of parthood
I
as
don't
actually.
see how the fact that they talk about paths and points means that the physics makes sense of that distinction, the further distinction about parts in the Mariologist sense. I mean, you could go through. I don't want to sound too scientistic or positivistic or that, but you could go through a relativity text without ever finding all this stuff about Mariology. Now that's not to say there aren't. And that's not a argument itself, because you can also go through it without finding. The theory will make all sorts of metaphysical assumptions that won't be stated. So I don't want to make too much of that. But on the other hand, is it needed? Is it needed by the science? I don't think so.
Okay.
I just think I could translate from 4 vectors to 3 plus 1 vectors. I could translate back and forth. I don't see that one's more powerful than the other. It's very hard for me to see how it could really matter.
Right. Again, this is sort of getting to the third form of skepticism about metaphysics, that it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, but I guess when you're thinking about the other issue, the first one, if you don't think it matters enough, then you don't even think you're talking about 2 different things.
Oh, really? I guess, I think there's lots of sort of, we could have like a trivial debate about how many balls of lint there are, in my pocket, whatever, who cares? But, still, you think there's, still a fact. Right. So, maybe some metaphysical debates are like that. Though I guess I kind of want to counsel a kind of open-mindedness about that issue, in the sense that I kind of think, like with the analogy that I was giving with pure mathematics. A lot of pure mathematics can seem sort of disconnected from reality and trivial, but maybe it turns out later that, hey, this actually has some interesting application. I kind of feel like some of metaphysics has this kind of flavor that, here's a question that we might or might not get ourselves interested in for whatever reason. Let's see if we can figure out the right answer, and maybe this will turn out to have interesting connection to other issues, but in a way it's really hard to settle the question of the connection to other issues in advance. Sometimes we actually have to go through the debate to figure out what, if any, connections there are.
Yeah, but this would really be to open up a can of worms, and we've already been talking for long enough. But but if it becomes like math, then it's like math, right? And then it's not about not about the actual world, or not it is about the actual world.
I don't know. We can talk about the ontology. There's the can of worms about what the subject matter of mathematics is. That's
right. So if I'm a nominalist about it all, then it is about the world in that sense. But
even if you're a Platonist, it's just about a different part of the world.
Different part of the world. That's true. but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, let's see. Well, we've been talking for an hour and 25 minutes, so maybe we should start to bring this to a close, I think. Um, let's see. I'm assuming David can edit this, my saying this right now, out.
Oh, right.
Edit this out.
Let this out.
Okay. Does that sound okay if we try to wrap it up now?
Yeah, no, sounds good.
It's kind of funny we didn't actually get to the. We were planning on talking about time, and then we talked for an hour
Yeah.
first.
I know. Well, we talked about we wound up sort of getting in the Mereology stuff.
Yeah.
I sort of tried to bring in the time stuff a little, and we did a little bit about it towards the end.
Yeah. That's all fine.
It was-
We didn't talk about the modality, which would have been good.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, you alluded to it a few times. So I should have picked up on it.
yeah.
I think we got in enough content.
What's that?
I think we got in
Oh
enough
yeah,
content.
I think so. And people see the back and forth there, and that's pretty good. And see the intuitions each way. All right, so let's maybe, I don't know. I guess maybe I wouldn't mind ending just by saying, a couple of things, and although I've been, something along the lines of, although I've been, playing the role of the skeptic, the metaphysical skeptic, to say a couple words in praise of metaphysics.
Cool.
I don't know.
And then maybe I'll sort of say briefly, maybe, a couple of words of skeptic. I'll try to sort of kind of give a little, accommodating sort of words of skeptical concern about metaphysics. And then do we want to sort of, we had talked about going back to the notational equivalence issue at the end. Do we want to conclude on that note?
Yeah, if you like.
Or, well,
Do you want to do that?
okay, yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll work for me.
Okay.
Should we resume the official conversation?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, should we do a 3 count to tell David?
Okay.
Okay.
1,
1, 2,
3.
3.
Okay. So we're this conversation nearing an end, and I just thought I would say a couple of words, although I have played the role of the skeptic. I mentioned at the beginning, in a different context, I could imagine myself playing the opposite role. So I wanted to say a couple of things in praise of metaphysics instead of just sitting here trying to damn it. And so I do think that metaphysical assumptions and metaphysics in general is very important. So finding out the metaphysical assumptions lying behind underneath contemporary science, I think, is very important. It's important at a level of understanding the science now. So I think a good understanding of the science requires understanding the metaphysics behind the science. It's also important prospectively. So it could be that and you see this in quantum gravity now, where people are trying to see this clash between quantum mechanics and general relativity. And really, there's this kind of anything goes atmosphere where people are looking for any, whatever the assumptions are behind the theories. Whether it's the assumption of a continuum or all sorts of other things, or even the assumption that there is time. And these are all, open game really. And by unearthing them and suggesting alternatives, philosophers, I think, and metaphysicians in particular, can play a role which would be helpful for science. And it doesn't all have to be in terms of, helpful for science, but I do think, in general, that, good science will have good metaphysics infused in it, and good metaphysics will have some kind of connection to science, even if peripheral. So I have a kind of symmetry thesis more than, say, Ladyman and Ross, who are looking to justify metaphysics, via what it can do for science. although they do make the good point too. Also, another reason why that in favor of metaphysics is that metaphysicians can ask questions about how the different sciences relate to one another, which is not a question that any particular science generally offers. And so I didn't want to come down as too much anti-metaphysics, because I do think, especially like where I work in philosophy of physics, I think that solving the measurement problem in quantum mechanics is very, very important. And it's really finding a metaphysics of the quantum world, although I think many people wouldn't like to put it that way or like to think of it that way.
Right. So I mean, I'm pretty sympathetic to a lot of what you're saying there, Craig. I guess I do think of metaphysical questions as, in the good case at least, as sort of interesting in their own right. Not only sort of in the service of science, but just sort of interesting in terms of our general view of the world. Though my attitude is, when you have sort of an interesting metaphysical question, is just, bring, all applicable knowledge to bear on the question and trying to, learn the answer to the question. And often, I think that science is a sort of great repository of our best knowledge. So often, the sort of general maxim of bringing to bear all applicable knowledge on the topic will mean bring to bear our best scientific theory. Especially if it speaks, fairly directly to the topic, as for instance in the case of time or something like that. To me, I think actually some interesting things for me that have emerged from our conversation are sort of different sorts of skepticism that one might have about metaphysical debates. I think there were at least three that emerged in the course of our conversation. One might think that there's no difference in meaning between the views at issue. And I think it's really hard to say when we have a case like that. And as we were both, as we were saying, if we just had a general theory of when we had notational equivalence and when we had a real difference in theories, that would really go a long way. I mean, that would really go all the way towards resolving this issue of when we have a difference in meaning and when we don't. There's also the question of, if we have a difference in meaning, can we discern which is the right theory? And that calls for an epistemology of metaphysics. That's also a huge and important topic, and there's room for skepticism there. And then there was the third line of skepticism that said that even if there is a difference in meaning, and even if there is a way to tell who's right, who cares? And I guess that calls for a general theory of what to care about. So maybe that calls for an ethics. So maybe what we've learned from this is that the question of whether to be pro or anti-metaphysical is really tied into one's entire philosophy, both one's theory of meaning, one's theory of knowledge, and one's theory of value. So maybe that sort of just makes the debate between us, to the extent that there is a debate, all the deeper.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's a wonderful way to put it. And I guess we can end there and leave, the further question about whether one should be a skeptic about coming up with a theory of metaphysical equivalence, and et cetera, an epistemology of metaphysics for another two people.
We both agree that would be an excellent topic for a dissertation.
Yes, that's right. Well, it's really been a pleasure, Jonathan, talking to you.
Same here, Greg.
And that was a lot of fun.